Britain. Here to go through the papers with me in more detail, Luca Watson, a political commentator with Young Voices UK. Luca, good morning.
Good morning.
Shall we talk about Elon Musk? The Times as well, talking about Elon Musk calling for Nigel Farage to be replaced as Reform leader. How do you think, shall we say, Nigel Farage has handled this?
Well, I imagine Nigel Farage has been quite surprised that all of a sudden, after a good few days with Musk endorsing him and saying that Britain needs reform, his billionaire backer has turned on him in this way. I think he's handled himself well in terms of being consistent on Tommy Robinson, and I think that's the right move for him and for reform. Musk doesn't seem to know about Robinson's other associations that he has here in Britain with his EDL days and also his many criminal convictions for things like mortgage fraud and drug possession. But I imagine this has been a pretty uncomfortable day for Farage.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, Nigel Farage says, this is a surprise. Elon's a remarkable individual. But on this, I'm afraid I disagree. And my view remains that Tommy Robinson is not right for reform and I never sell out my principles. It's been quite an extraordinary start to the year for reform. You know, they ended December with their sort of triumph saying that they had more members now than the Conservatives did. I wonder what a threat you think reform poses to Keir Starmer in this year to come.
I think they still pose a threat to Starmer, definitely. They definitely have momentum with them. 170,000 members now they've recently announced. So I think they do still have that momentum. They do still pose a threat to Keir Starmer, but also crucially to the Conservatives and Kemi Badenoch, who seems to really be struggling to take off as leader. And I imagine that will continue. And I think it's up to Keir Starmer now. If he gets his act together, if the Labour government start delivering, then I think that's the best way for them to show off reform and to make it so that Nigel Farage isn't such a threat.
Yeah, you wonder how much of a risk it is for the Prime Minister to say, look, I'm going to leave that sort of reform row to the Conservatives, because that's potentially could be then his greatest force to jostle with as well. But Keir Starmer also can't ignore Elon Musk. There's a brilliant piece of analysis in the Times this morning that says the Prime Minister has avoided a direct confrontation with the ex-owner over fears that an escalating row could have repercussions when Trump enters the White House. This relationship has to be handled carefully, doesn't it? Because, I mean, we've seen how quickly those relationships Elon Musk has can seem to slide, but he does have the ear of Donald Trump, who in about, I think, 11, 12 days becomes president again.
Yes, and I think that's why Labour have so far been quiet. They're in this quite awkward position of obviously disagreeing completely with what Musk says, and lots of them want to defend themselves against those accusations, but also recognising at a diplomatic level that perhaps it's in the interests of the government and Britain as a whole to at least not attack Musk or not go after him personally, given how close he is to Trump. But I think so far Labour have broadly done the right thing, which is to ignore it and hope that, given Musk tends to be quite sporadic with where he puts his attention span, that he'll move on pretty soon and that the government can continue and no longer worry about him there.
But you wonder, he does keep attacking Keir Starmer and now Jess Phillips as well. I mean, he doesn't mince his words. He said Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. And before, when we had the riots over the summer, as Keir Starmer was quite fresh as Prime Minister, I mean, he's still pretty fresh now, Elon Musk was calling him two-tier Keir. I mean, his criticism is stinging.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say Musk is not a fan of Starmer, and I think Starmer will be aware of that. And I don't think Starmer is going to be able to change Musk's mind at this point. I don't think this is something that can really be worked on or convinced out of. So I think Labour have to try and be pragmatic with it and recognise that Musk is an ally of Trump for now. I mean, that's another question. Given how quickly he was to throw Farage under the bus, how long will that Trump-Musk partnership last? And I think for now, the best strategy is what they've been doing, which is to just not attack him directly, refute some of the more stinging accusations on behalf of on the part of Musk, and essentially hope that it all dies down without giving it too much attention.
And ultimately provide a positive agenda for us to be talking about, I think, which doesn't mean, airtime, column inches don't get sucked up by sort of Elon Musk. Let's look at the front page of the Daily Mail. I lived in France, actually, Luca, for a couple of years, and people used e-scooters a lot, and they didn't cause the sort of same level of discontent it does here. The Daily Mail says e-scooter collisions have trebled in 3 years, prompting urgent calls for law changes. What is the suggestion of how we need to change how they're legislated here?
Well, there's calls, as usual, for more regulations and regulating some of the sale at the point of sale. which I think it's interesting that once again we see another issues where the call is for always more and more regulations. E-scooters are already banned on roads, they're already banned on pavements. It seems to be more an issue of non-enforcement rather than regulations.
Yeah, what they're saying is they sort of need legislation to look at top speeds, brakes, size of wheels. I have to say the problems I've had, this happened just the other day, is someone crashed into me driving an e-scooter. I actually shouldn't laugh, it wasn't very nice, on the pavement. And that is the problem. But Luca, it's a wider issue. You know, are we really going to see a sort of police crackdown on e-scooters on pavements? That feels unlikely.
It does feel unlikely, and I hope you're okay. But I think that's a wider problem, that the police often, they just don't enforce the existing laws, that they seem to not be bothering. We already know the statistics on stuff like burglaries and robberies and how bad they are at solving crimes. And they don't seem to be a particularly proactive force across the country in trying to prevent crimes. And I think that's one of the issues we see with e-scooters, is that they're just not bothering to enforce the law as it already exists and stopping those who are already breaking it by going on pavements and hitting people like yourself.
Do you know, it's and I was fine, but I was more quite shocked to think, oh, I can't believe you're sort of not decelerating on the pavement, or why you're even driving on the pavement. Yeah, I can't actually remember what the law is. If you know, please text in. As far as I was aware, you could sort of rent scooters, but you didn't have a license to drive them on the road anyway, if you bought one yourself. Someone correct me, I'm probably wrong.
Yeah, I think... So my understanding is that you can use it on private property, but you can't use them on public roads and pavements. So in theory, there shouldn't be any e-scooters about.
Yeah, or how even buying them for clearly things like commuting, that doesn't really work. The Prime Minister's getting a lot of flack today, and I'm afraid that's a trend that's going to carry on. There's a piece inside the Times saying Starmer's slow speech is struggling to energise the public, and that's sort of his speaking delivery. Do you think, we've obviously gone from quite a contrast to others with prime ministers of recent years. Do you think sort of his gift of speaking is maybe lacking, is not as persuasive as maybe we want from a prime minister?
I think that's putting it generously, to be honest. Yes, he's not a great public speaker, but I think it goes beyond just his speaking and his voice, say. If you watched his New Year's video, for example, he was in this kind of weird, dimly lit room behind a desk. Even his mannerisms were very cold. I think it's the whole package, if you will. He clearly doesn't seem to have a comms team around him who are particularly competent or really know how to get him to come across as energized, as interesting, as worth listening to. So I don't think it's just a case of his voice or his speech or how slowly he speaks. It's, as I say, the whole package around him means that he's just not a very good public speaker.
He doesn't exude dynamism, does he? This research said the Prime Minister's speeches are quite slow, and it means you can't then use sort of snappy social media clips. And he comes across as quite prosecutorial. I mean, that's not a surprise, but also pious. That you think you would want to tweak.
Yeah, and I think it's something that could be tweaked. I mean, he's obviously a man who's been used to public speaking. It was his career for decades. So it's something that he should be able to do a lot better. And I'm surprised that it's taken them within the Labour Party maybe this long to realise that it's an issue. But I don't think he's ever going to be. He's not a sort of a populist rabble-rouser. He's not someone who's going to get huge crowds to cheer at him. But I think just getting the basics right, just when he is going to do a video where he's speaking, having the lighting be a bit better, maybe having a bit more charisma, I think these are relatively easy steps that shouldn't be beyond him.
I wonder how charismatic you think Pope Francis is. Another story inside the Times this morning. The Pope has called out nuns with, I'm quoting here, vinegar faces. The head of the Catholic Church told a group of Dominican sisters to be more affable, avoid gossip, and basically said, you know, don't have a vinegar face. I was quite surprised.
Yes, well, the Pope he seems to have a tendency of coming out with such statements and shocking some people now and again. I think a nun with a sort of sour face for me is what nuns tend to look like. That's how I usually associate them. And I think his main concern seems to be that essentially there aren't enough nuns, that there are very, very few young women who are becoming nuns, and that soon there could be many areas where they just simply run out. And so this is part of maybe a broader push to try and appeal to younger women, to try and make becoming a nun seem more attractive. And if nuns are looking happy and like they're having the time of their lives, maybe that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, I think he was saying sort of you need to show joy for the world. And so sort of looking sour doesn't really help the case. It's quite an interesting read this morning. Final thing, Luca, according to the Star front page today, they've mocked up a picture of a couch potato. It's a person that they've made out of potatoes. It looks very silly. It's classic of the Star. But what they're saying is today will be a day people pull a sickie because it's a snow day. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. I think any excuse is a good excuse to pull a sickie, and snow days seem to be one of the best out there. I mean, to be fair, someone who doesn't have a car and has always relied on public transport, often, for some reason, even with the tiny smattering of snow, everything seems to fall apart. All the trains get cancelled, buses don't turn up. So I'm sure there are cases where genuinely people have been stopped and prevented by the weather from going to work. But as I say, yeah, any excuse is a good excuse.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that. The Star is quoting experts. I don't know who they are. They reckon 1 in every 30 employees will claim they can't travel to work this morning. So if you've gone back to the office and you find it's quite quiet, this might be why. Luca, thank you for not pulling a sickie. Luca Watson, political commentator with Young Voices UK, joining me this morning.